This episode is presented in partnership with Open Cities Lab. Visit them at opencitieslab.org. A free and fair media is critical in a healthy democracy. Though while the data age has dramatically enhanced our ability to generate and share news, it has similarly enabled the rise of fake news, programmatic agendas, and media echo chambers. The Dexter project seeks to leverage modern computational paradigms to monitor and analyze South Africa's digital media. William Bird, Director of Media Monitoring Africa, and Matthew Adendorff, the data lead at the Open Cities Lab, are my guests today on Future Cities Africa to discuss the Dexter project. William, Matthew, welcome. Give us a brief introduction to your respective roles.
I'm Matthew Adendorff. I'm the data lead at Open Cities Lab, which is a civic tech not-for-profit from South Africa, originally from Durban. We began as Open Data Durban, but have now got presence in Joburg and Cape Town. And we work on the democratization of information, and working with civil society and local government and national government and provincial government to improve their use of data, to enhance service delivery, and to give people a more democratic access to their rights through the use and provision of data.
I'm William Bird, and I'm the Director of Media Monitoring Africa. And in the specific context, we're the home of Dexter, to the extent that MMA has been running since 1993, so for 28 years or something like that. And in that time, what we've done is essentially something that these days is seen as quite trendy, has been about collecting data. And for the first 10 or 15 years of our existence, data would be kept and harvested from media and news bulletins, usually by capturing it on pieces of paper. Then it moved from pieces of paper into computers and Excel spreadsheets as those things developed. I think before Excel there was another format of using data roughly. But then it moved to Excel, and then it moved to, then we thought we took a wild leap into SQL databases that were Microsoft based again. And it was in roughly 2013, somewhere around there, that we looked at having a database that would allow us to capture more than just one particular project. So it was one database to rule them all. And thus Dexter was begun. At the time, we were working with, they were then called Code for SA. They now Open Up, and we worked with them. And then they changed their priorities a bit, and Open Cities or Open Data Durban came on, and that was with Matt. And since then, we've been able to take Dexter from that first version into Dexter, what we're calling now Dexter 2.0.
What exactly is Dexter?
In essence, though, it's a tool that enables us to gather a lot of data, and not just gather a lot of data, but use it in a way that can actually be useful for our work and making the media and improving the media, helping us understand where we've come and potentially where we're going to be going to.
Dexter is a cloud-based system that ingests articles from a variety of Southern African and a few select global news sources, specifically English digital media by and large, at least in its automated form. And it ingests all these articles at night and runs natural language processing and machine learning on those articles to extract key entities, being people, businesses, etc., the utterances they make and the places that they're speaking about and from. And that information is stored alongside the documents into a database. Dexter now has over 2 million articles, which is then queryable and modifiable by human monitors. So machine learning will never surpass a human, I think, ever, for its ability to process the nuances in text. So MMA brings with them very knowledgeable and trained human monitors that can then, the system allows them to edit those articles, modify, adjust, correct. And so over time, you're developing both an automated growing database, but also a human tagged and curated select set. And then what Dexter does on top of that is the ability to run further analyses, further dashboarding, visualization, topic identification, using other data science and machine learning methods. But it effectively becomes a very powerfully tagged source of South African news media dating back to 2013 that can be used then to drive insights, explain voice, who is given a greater share of the narrative, etc.
And how exactly did Open Cities Lab and Media Monitoring Africa get involved in this project?
When Open Cities Lab was originally formed as Open Data Durban, and our founder, Richard Gevers, was mentored and guided by Adi Ale, who was the CEO of and director of Code for South Africa at the time, which then became Open Up. And at that time, Greg Kemper, who was the lead dev at Code for South Africa and a phenomenal developer, at least I believe, built the first version of Dexter. But he believed that he'd taken it as far as he could from more of a infrastructure and cloud development perspective, at least took it to a point, and then saw Open Data Durban, now Open Cities Lab, as at the time of being able to now push it into the data science and data driven space, which was much more my specialty at the time compared to development. And so we decided this was a good chance to hand over to drive Dexter from a data perspective and less from a development perspective. But over the years, we've now also built up dev capacity to also drive that as well.
In essence, we'd been working with the great Greg, we called him, because he was, he is a genius developer, and he had done so much amazing stuff. And then it felt like a bit of an unpleasant divorce, to be honest, when he was saying to us, no, we're going to farm you on to someone else, actually, with this amazing tool. And then we met Matt and Richard, and we found that actually, sometimes second marriages are even better than your first one. So you've got, they're different, but their skills and abilities are equally amazing in different areas, And so it's been incredible doing amazing things with Matt. Particularly on Dexter, and being able to, as I said, take it to the next this next phase of Dexter 2.0. And we talk about Dexter like it is a living being because of its enormous potential, which we are increasingly finding different uses for and trying to service. But anyway, so the short answer is yeah, as Matt said, we moved along to Open Data Durban and started doing all sorts of really cool things. So, and then they became OCL. So, and we foresee that relationship going, far into the future.
How can Dexter be used for a focused subject like the elections or COVID reporting in Africa?
So one of the basis for Dexter, right, is to understand that if you have a democratic society, the media is a critical part of that. Not just because there's this idea of them as the fourth estate, they hold the powerful to account. Yes, that's well and fine and true, but there's also this lovely expression that says the media doesn't tell you what to think, but it does tell you what to think about. And if you look at the media and how they work in society and what role they fulfill in society, they, to varying degrees, both enforce power and they challenge power, right? So they challenge power by exposing wrongdoing and corruption as an example, but they also enforce it by showing where bad things happen and the consequences of those actions in kind of broader terms. That's what media does in your society. So you say, on any day in South Africa, there's more news stories than you can shake a stick at. There's more urgent, critical issues than we can ever hope to have time to possibly unpack and get down to. So you're saying when media are doing things, they're making a deliberate choice about what they're showing and what they're not. And the best way of determining what media are reflecting and what society they're representing to us is through media monitoring and analysis, because it's not through one story that you get the idea that a certain person is a crook or a certain political party is damaging. You get it as a period of time, as a trend. So we know as a reality, right? Women make up 52% of our population. They're around 22% of our sources in our media. That's a fundamental inequality. It's not unique to South Africa by any means, or indeed the region. But what it is doing is it does tell you about power and how it works in society. So it's not surprising then that women occupy that level of power, because when you look at the people that have the dominant positions in our society, they overwhelmingly tend to be men in the upper echelons of power, right? And so when you look at media, you suddenly start to see these things. So having access and understanding and monitoring and capturing what the media are telling us, and conversely what they aren't telling us, is probably one of the most effective, efficient ways of seeing where power lies in any society. Of course, it's being challenged now in very fundamental ways through social media, etc. But that ability to shape the narrative, to determine what issues are told and what issues aren't told, that kind of thing determines whether or not your nation will succeed as a democratic state or not. So when you then say, what is Dexter in an election period, because Dexter has that ability of seeing all of these things all at the same time, in an election period, we're able to use Dexter to answer the questions of, is our media reporting elections fairly? Because again, fairness isn't about one story, it's about several thousand stories. So in 2019, I think we had about 12,000, I forget now, stories just focused on elections, looking at reporting. So when you then say, are the media reporting our elections fairly? It's not a thumbsuck thing, or this idea of 3 or 5 or even 20 stories that made a party look bad, or undermined democratic principles. It's about looking at it over a period of time and what those issues are. So you can say, is our media covering us freely and fairly? Are the media covering a diversity of issues and topics? So we know in South Africa that poverty, inequality, racism, gender-based violence, our failed digital transition, like these things are, food security, climate change, all of those things should be among the biggest issues that we should be talking about in an election period, right? You think that's what they're going to be talking about. But what you find is that overwhelmingly politicians, they make the continued mistake of thinking that the elections are about them, because they've completely lost touch with what it is to be a democratic party, and that actually elections aren't about them, it's about the public, it's about the people, we the people of South Africa, right? Free and fair, what topics they get. So when you look at those topics around child abuse, gender-based violence, you see very, very little coverage of those things really, right? And you can tell that through Dexter. In fact, as far as I'm aware, it's one of the only means in South Africa, certainly, that is able to give us that kind of information in a way that is accurate, and that we can say, well, here's how we came to that determination. So Dexter gives us that. So as a means of determining, did the media do their job in an election period, we're able to make a determination on that and say, yes, they contributed to our democracy and our elections being more free and fair and credible, or no, they didn't. So in 2016, again, thanks to Dexter, we found that the SABC, for the first time in our democratic elections, was undermining our democratic state because they weren't covering the elections in a free and fair manner. 2019, back on track, fortunately. So that's why it's such a critical thing. And Matt can talk about the technology behind that question.
What is the elections work that the Dexter project is currently underway with?
From a technological standpoint of taking on the analysis of something like an election, which is like any broader topic across that's covered within the media, is you're specifically looking for articles that match a theme. And the initial way one would approach that is starting, first of all, to trim down the base of articles that you want to look at on a day-by-day basis, which is often done through the mechanism of either keywords or key sources or people of certain affiliations that exist within the text, and be able to pare down to an article base that represents the corpus from which we will construct this analysis. And then based on that, you start to look from a kind of a cohort unpacking of what are the topics that these articles covered, what were the key words that evidence themselves out of the articles. So which words have strong meaning from a statistical standpoint in the article, who are the sources, and knowing about the sources, we know their genders, their affiliations in some cases, because they've been tagged in previous analyses, and being able to say, okay, on this topic, these are the entities that are mentioned, these are the sources, this is what the sources are saying. And so you start to unpack the topic by looking at who are the voices and what are those voices being used to say, as well as the general tone or the underlying topics that might be evident in the work statistically. So the key is basically to use this base of knowledge that we've extracted from these articles as the building blocks to unpack a setting and unpack a narrative.
On challenges, what is the biggest challenge that the Dexter project had to overcome, and how did you do it?
From a technical standpoint, the biggest challenge that we faced is just the growth of Dexter. When Dexter began, it was a couple 100,000 articles, and since then we're now into the millions of articles. The ingestion rate is over 30,000 a month. And you start now working on with data, particularly text data, which is chunky and big. On that scale, you need to start evolving technologically. And it's now reaching the point where we're looking at the need to potentially change the underlying infrastructure type that the database sits on, for example, or reformulating our questions to be more graphic or more network-based rather than pure relational text-based analytics. And so that's from the tech side, it's the biggest challenge is always just dealing with the volumes of data and stepping into the genuine big data realm, which brings with it much larger bulldozers rather than shovels. So that's from my side. I don't know, William, maybe from your side, the more organizational policy level.
I mean, I would agree with that. And then to add that from the non-data clever person's sort of side of things, the biggest challenge has been that we want to increasingly use Dexter for different things and have different kind of ideas and purposes about how to use it. And so that's forced us to do quite a number of big rethinks about how we show that data, how we can extract that data. As you know, I mean, because in my mind I think, oh good, I'm going to just go and search the last 3 months for data, all of the data that we've got that has the following 3 keywords in it. And then, you know, you'll try that, and then I'll go off and I'll have a cup of tea and I'll come back in 10 minutes. And if Dexter thinks it's too big, then Dexter will go, no, this is, I can't do this at the moment, you know. So some of those things, and that's linked to Matt's issue about just the amount of data. But so I think one of our biggest sort of coming challenges is that idea of how we represent and visualize some of the things that we try and get out of Dexter. And part of that is about some of the different questions that we need to think about and how we can ask them so that we can still get really useful information from Dexter. And at the same time, my other biggest thing with it actually is we've got 2 million news stories in there, and I consistently wake up in the middle of the night thinking, what are we doing with this? Like, why aren't we using this more? You know, there's like, we've got, you know, in terms of being able to track the last 7 years of South Africa's history. I mean, just think of how completely crackers our country is. And then you can start to get a sense of how amazing is that we've got this, you know, really cool record. And how the hell do you start to show that? And how do we, you know, how do you begin to access that? Because, I mean, if you think back to just a few weeks ago, our country was just about burning down. And now we're all like, oh, well, la, la, la. And we're now into elections period where, you know, our country may well burn down again. But it's like completely mad. And it's being able to And it's such an important record. This thing for us of keeping that amount of data is precisely so that you don't forget, so that you can put things in perspective. You can see how much more worse things were in some respects then, and how they are better now and worse now, etc. So that for me is like a future biggest challenge.
What application, if any, does Dexter have beyond news media?
One of the more obvious ones is that we're currently again working with OCL on is around the ADH project, which is the Africa Data Hub, which is a ridiculously cool project. And there, Dexter's not being used for its ability to analyze media trends in that respect, but it's there largely as a monitoring evaluation tool, if you like. So that's one of the other uses for it. We also have also working with one of these other NGOs, TIPS, which is Trade and Industrial Policy NGO, which does excellent work around trade and industrial policy. Surprise! And specifically there, they're able to extract information relating to foreign direct investment. So there, it's using the information from data not just for news analysis and media rights issues, but for those things. And I mean, I think those are two of the other pretty obvious and prominent ones that stand out. Matt?
Yeah, I agree with William. I think also what you've got, Dexter is driven about textual information with the key is people, fundamentally. And what was amazing to me is the elegance of the structure of Dexter, which, I mean, MMA would have helped define initially, and then Greg would have implemented, but it all comes down to a voice saying something. And I think in a human world, because we still are very human, and I don't think the machines are going to come for us anytime soon, but just because how stupid they are sometimes. But that idea of voice and access and presence and people, I think, transcends news media. It can be from company archives. It could be from email chains. It could be from advertising, like audio broadcasts, shows. I think the concept of that's now speaking from a technological scale needing to get much bigger, but I think the principle of understanding what is the loudest voice and what is often the most ignored voice really allows us to shine a light on what is society's movers and motivators and who's being forgotten. And so I think in terms of data, that is applicable across many things. And the translation of it then just becomes a technological challenge of taking a data source of some type, transforming it into the forms of voice that are important, and being able to analyze it. So it naturally aligns well from a news and an article perspective, but it's extensible to any form of capturing voice and agency.
What are the key steps to a more free and fair media?
So I think that there are a number of things, and we haven't yet begun to really tap these elements of it. I mean, we're moving into more nuanced kind of language analysis, and we're looking at bias and those things. And Matt, maybe, that's something you should tell him about, is that really exciting partnership with UKZN, about the work that they've been doing. I mean, it's far too complex for my brain, but it's really amazing, right? Is that just by monitoring the media, a democratic state isn't going to be democratic just because you have an independent judiciary, executive, and parliament, right? It only can function as a democratic state if you also throw into that mix an independent, free, diverse media. And those things can only really function fully if there are active civil society bodies. So you need, for democracy to function, you need all of these things, like a hive, really, of bees. Everything has its job and its function and its purpose. And the moment some of those things fail, the whole thing can go down on a downhill slide and go towards hell. So, for media to be doing their job, people need to hold them to account. We do that, right? We need to be saying, you don't cover children's issues anywhere near enough. This is a problem for these and these reasons, right? Because you can't just leave them to just represent power in the way that they like, because and think that no one's watching, and hold them to the same kind of standards that we expect our politicians to be held to. So Dexter is the tool. It's the cement of all of those things that allows us to build up our democratic society. And that without that, I would very much doubt that you'd be able to say that you can have the kind of free and fair media that we have if you didn't have organizations like ours doing the work that we do, which wouldn't then be possible if we didn't have Dexter.
If I may expand on that, I think absolutely, and I think what we've learned, what happened with the recent violence in South Africa is that there is a level of lack of communication or a lack of agency given at community level. And I think in order for true democracy to thrive in this space is to make sure that those voices are amplified. That is most of society. And we need to, I think, making sure that there is a mechanism for voice, be it local radio, be it local newspapers, or encouraging more of those. The ability for thought leadership to not be considered as some sort of expert opinion, but it should be somebody in your neighborhood that's wise and able to impart knowledge. So to have a real community level discourse that has the agency to move up and gather the ear of decision makers and holders of and agents of change, I think is critical. We've got to give that voice to as many people as possible and make sure that they have a forum to genuinely participate. Democratic participation, both from being provided with the right data to understand their context and not have to I think South African societies they get thoroughly researched and surveyed, but people aren't giving them back their information. People aren't enabling them to use that information to say to the powers that be, I demand more. Here's my information. And so I think it's been ensuring that information gets given into people's hands and that they are given a voice to leverage their democratic right to change their circumstance. And I think that is something we need to work on to drive better democracy here. Another very cool thing, as Willie mentioned it earlier, is the partnership and genuine collaboration across South African insanely capable institutions in this country is at UKZN in a partnership there with members from their physics department, members from their social psychology, it's been and more, and I don't want to do it a disservice, but they're busy working in a cross-disciplinary manner to develop a neural net based model to unpack and identify polarization topics in the news, and particularly polarizing voices in the news. So the ability to look at a media cohort and say, cool, these topics are becoming particularly polarizing. Now, polarizing isn't necessarily bad, but it does identify those points of contestation or points of difference, which are valuable to understand. But it also speaks to the ability to develop. The polarization can also be things like the view of gender. How do we view certain roles? Like, what is our view of a domestic worker in the news? The model trained on that will tell you that it's almost entirely linked with being assumed that it is a feminine role, which it speaks to. It speaks to something that happens in this country. But is that something we want? Is it something we want to engage with? It starts to really look at our associations with certain terms. And that helps reflect society. It helps reflect the state of things. And so I think that's very powerful work. I've also got the opportunity to work with researchers on starting to look at broadening the natural language processing into non-Western languages, starting to get NLP in local South African languages built by South African researchers and students, and it's exceptional. Work by Vukosi Marivate at the University of Pretoria is pushing in that space, and it's really exciting to be part of that. And I think it's the bringing together of those technologies and capable abilities in the country, as well as the amplifying the citizenry, is all part and parcel of driving democracy.
At the moment, a lot of the kind of discussions and understanding and approach to technology is this thing that is bad and is limiting and causing problems in our world, like hate speech and disinformation, which clearly it truly is. And I guess something that Dexter and all sorts of other projects, by no means is it alone in that, but what it does do is it shows how you can use those same technologies to actually make democracy work and make our country a better place. And that's really powerful, actually, because it's an important way of giving an example to people that says, yes, there are lots of reasons to be excited about technology beyond the shiny devices and whatever, but that all of the algorithms and the things that drive those and the things that underpin those, they don't work for democracy unless we make them work for democracy. And what this shows is when you put in the effort and the thought to it, they can work for democracy in ways that, I think that we've got a lot more exploring to do. What's actually really unique and special about Dexter? We've talked about it being able to do these things, but I mean, for me, it's important that this is technology that is homegrown and built at the bottom of the continent, and it's doing things that really haven't been done in many other places in the world, or that are being done to varying degrees by universities with massive amount of resources. And here you're talking about it, effectively two really tiny NGOs doing things that are amazing. And I think that there's some real value in people understanding that and having an opportunity to be incredibly proud of just the kind of amazing things that are being done in this part of the world. I don't think that we kind of do that anywhere near enough. I mean, for them, I think that the work that Matt and them are doing, behind the scenes that most of us, clever people that understanding how these things actually function, will ever get to see, right? I mean, it's so bad actually that I'd asked one of the designers to do us a T-shirt, which I still have to follow up on, just of the structure of Dexter, so that we can start to, because within MMA, Dexter has this like hallowed, space. It's like it's another part of our team, and so, and that speaks to the fact that the work that Matt and them have been doing on it is amazing. It's really incredible, and that needs to be highlighted. That you've got this team sitting in Durban that does world class work. That is on a par, if not in many respects, better than anything that's been done anywhere else in the world. That's amazing.